and welcome to the legal panel. I think the object of this panel is to try and dig down a little deeper. We had the high-level discussions by our CEOs earlier, which was very fruitful and very interesting. And I think what we want to do now is to dig a little bit deeper and look at what content creators, owners, license holders can do from a legal and enforcement point of view. What is their recourse to the law? And I'm delighted to have three top contributors with us. Two are lawyers. Thank you, gentlemen. One is not. So between us two non-lawyers and the two lawyers, it's 2-2. So hopefully we'll be able to keep these things moving along. Adi, I'd like to start with you. As the in-house lawyer of OSN, you suspect that someone is stealing your content. From a legal perspective, what's the first move?
Well, it's a question on, what we do on a case-to-case basis, because all different sorts of piracies and different sorts of challenges there. And it largely depends on what sort of piracy we're looking at. Is it a subscriber who's pirated our content, or is it an IPTV piracy, or it's someone else who's put a content which is exclusive to us, or it could be related to our trademark infringement. So as a first step, we analyze where this piracy is coming from. Is it from us, or is it from an external source? And then we work with our platform security team to gather as much evidence as possible. And subsequently, we also involve authorities and external counsel. I say it largely depends on a case-to-case basis.
And can you give us an idea of what the differences would be if it was somebody who was dealing in illegal set-top boxes or somebody who was running a torrent site, for example?
In case of a dealer who's selling illegal IPTV decoders or set-top boxes which pirate content, we analyze that set-top box or IPTV, which is, if it is available in the market. If it's a subscriber, we send down a fingerprint. We have checks and balances in place, so we can identify the person who's actually pirating the content, if it's our subscriber. We can pinpoint the location in certain cases. We then gather as much as evidence possible which needs to be then simplified to be able to be presented to the authorities through external counsel. Because essentially we are going to talk about IP infringement. We're not going to be talking about other sorts of crimes committed, because that is what is going to matter to us. And the courts will look at the evidence and understand whether this fits within the law or not. So there's a large, it's a large issue which is just simplified, and then we work internally with external counsel to ensure that we are able to present it properly. So that is a bit of a challenge. But then over time, we fine-tune the process where we work efficiently within the teams we have at OSN.
Omar, as external counsel, in terms of litigation, is it entirely about IP law, or does it vary by territory, by country?
Sure. Well, fortunately, the internet piracy is governed by copyright laws that consider this as a crime, which is a good thing, because you get to harshly prosecute the offender and take them to the criminal court. But it's also not, because you have to go convince the criminal prosecutor, and you need evidence that may be sophisticated in some countries. And you have to establish that you are the copyright owner or the licensee, and sometimes you need to go through detailed documentation, legalized, etc. So it can be annoying to put together a criminal case. But as a practitioner, our strategy is always to look at bringing the strongest case. So we don't rely on the copyright law alone. Of course not. Actually, our strategy has always been how to bring in the electronic crimes law. Because, as you'd appreciate, electronic crimes are fairly recent. The penalties in those crimes are higher. The fines are much higher than that in the copyright law. The jail term is higher. The remedies you would have as a content owner or copyright owner are much better than only relying on copyright. So whether be it torrent websites, as you were talking to Aditya right now, or even if you were selling setup boxes, we'd still try to link that in as an electronic crimes. And how would we do that? There must be some sort of electronic dealing between the trader that sells these setup boxes and the customer, and that you subscribe online or you pay your subscription online. That's enough for us to consider this electronic crimes. And that's how we put together the case of copyright electronic crimes.
And is the onus upon you to do the investigating, to bring the evidence to the enforcement authorities?
Absolutely.
Does it vary depending on your territory?
Well, absolutely. No, the onus is always on you, that you have to prove that you're the owner and this is an infringement. The investigation's onus is on you as well. You have to find the relevant jurisdiction in that locality. I think when we talk about how much efforts you put based on jurisdiction is a decision that you would have to make along with your client is, should we actually follow this through as a court case, or is there a shortcut? Because if there's a lot of onus and you need to work really hard to establish a criminal case, but you don't have enough investigations or enough intelligence to do that, maybe resorting to administrative case is the better option. And we've had cases. I was just talking to Rwanda Zerbi, who used to sit as counsel with the Jordanian Media Commission. And we used to file administrative cases with the Media Commission in Jordan against broadcasters who broadcast illegal content or pirated content. And action would be taken to stop it on the spot. So that's much easier than going through a very lengthy court litigation and demands of the prosecutor and delaying, and then gets transferred to another prosecutor and so on. So it's a decision you'd have to make based on the strength of your case and evidence available. And if you have a shortcut, of course, why would you go through a detailed case?
Waleed, as a director of content, how attractive does that sound in terms of mounting a prosecution against someone who might be stealing the content of owners on your platform?
Frankly, it's always, as my colleague said, it's always a very long process. The best case scenario is like, 6 months to hunt down a pirate, so which carries a lot of loss for the content owner, the broadcaster. However, there is another perspective to this piracy ecosystem. All torrent sites are being funded by ads, so there is advertiser. And I'm sure most of advertisers do not know that their advertising are being put on these sites. Why? Because it was a decision of a digital media agency who picked high traffic with low CPM. So actually, there is another player here that we can also follow, and I believe it's easier to hunt down, which is the advertiser or the media agency. Advertiser is a big brand, is a big company, well-established company with a legal firm or legal arm, so they are easily to talk to. And definitely, if we manage to stop advertising on these sites, we'll cut their resources, and hence we'll stop them.
Adi, does that follow from your point of view in terms of a tactic, the kind of targets that you would go after, advertisers, the criminals themselves? How do you make that call?
This is, something which relates to the issue of collaboration, and there's a lot of that happening at the moment. Earlier this morning, the CEOs were discussing, how we should be sharing information and working together, and there was some sort of commitment there between the members. And that's what we do when it comes to a specific team within OSN. We work with the studios. We work with the MPA. We work with certain organizations around the world. We work with Interpol, Europol. We work for technology providers. We work with Google. We work with Facebook. There are checks and balances in place. There are rules and regulations. And obviously, the collaboration cannot be, a mandatory thing. It has to be an initiative. It has to be done on a voluntary basis. And that's
What
where...
are the challenges in that? If it's a voluntary basis, how do you actually bring all these parties together and end up with better law?
Correct. Yeah, a lot of these times the challenge is to, first of all, explain the issue. And there are multiple issues. And some of them are complex. And some of them are damaging to the business models. Where we need to find through this what we need to do is, with this collaboration, we need to, where the lawyers play a big role, is to talk about what is legal, what is illegal, and then find a middle ground where everyone is happy to be without violating any laws. And the penalties could be quite high, especially if you're looking at EU and UK, in US, North America. We are catching up in this region. The law is evolving. As and when the technology evolves, we need the law to catch up as well. Having said that, we've had good judgments in terms of internet piracy where we had complex issues involved, where we had to simplify it. We had to ask for an expert witness. So we have challenges, but the industry is it's creative industry. So we have to be creative in terms of solutions as well. So we do come up with proper solutions which fit within the law when we present the evidence. And obviously it's a team effort from our platform security team, from our operations team, to be able to explain that to others, to be able to have that collaboration. One of the other things we also do is ensure that we've created enough awareness, not just with the consumers, but also with the authorities. So we have regular workshops in different countries. For example, we've done workshops in UAE, Kuwait, Jordan, Egypt, KSA, and it's an ongoing process because we need to keep up with the pirates.
Omar, there's a perception that in this region, the IPR laws are not as advanced as they could be. Do you think that's a fair comment? Do you have to actually educate the governments and the regulators in order to pursue cases?
I wouldn't blame the laws, no. I wouldn't blame the laws. You have to remember, most our countries are WTO members, so, and joined in the later 90s or after 2000, the case of Saudi Arabia. So if that's the case, that means you had to upgrade your logs to be in tune with the most recent international agreements like TRIPS agreements and so on. So all the laws are fairly acceptable as international standard. Quite good. There's nothing wrong with the laws. The issue is, I think, owed to culture. Do you speak to a judge who doesn't find this terribly wrong, although the law says it's a crime? So most likely the judge is going to rule the minimum, which is the fine penalty, which can be 3,000 dirhams in case of a trademark infringement, can be 10,000 dirhams in UAE trademark infringement. I've seen judges as low as 300 JDs in Jordan, but up to 3,000 JDs in Jordan. So you're talking about the range of $500 to $5,000, roughly.
And comparing that with the cost of actually mounting the litigation.
Oh, the cost would be much more. So if you are litigating using a lawyer, of course, your cost would be more than the end remedy. I don't think this is something that you would assess as a content holder, is how much is this person paying and how much am I getting back? No, if you're fighting piracy, you have to fight piracy. There's a cost to fighting piracy. And
I mean, Waleed, just on that point, as somebody who's managing content, looking after content, Omar's saying it's got to be done. You've got to go after the pirates, but it's incredibly expensive. Can you see that cost being a valuable thing to do?
Well, yes.
It's worth the spend.
And such matters, we shouldn't look at it from a business side or financial side. It's cutting off piracy. It's stopping my content, everyone's content, from being seen for free. So keeping the value of our content, no matter how much we're investing at this. So yes, absolutely.
Omar, as somebody who is being approached by your broadcast clients, your TV clients, what's your advice to them when they are considering litigation?
well, normally we would look at how serious the pirate is, because if it's retailers selling syrup boxes, if it's small timers, we try to approach this through in administrative ways. Why? Because you want low cost, you want quick results, and you want it done. But if this is a major pirate that has a network and feeding, you want to prosecute this criminally because you want deportation. And we've received deportation judgments in both Kuwait and UAE. You want confiscation, removal of the equipment, and confiscation of that equipment. You want to capture all the evidence possible and also stop the servers and have them removed. So the decision to take litigation depends really, like Aditya said, is it a real serious threat that we have to prosecute it the whole way and try to make a very deterrent message to others in the industry and this network, this pirates network, that we as a content owner will not tolerate this and will take severe action? Or is it something that you want to clean the market and make sure that you can contact as much as possible? It can be done through legal notices or through administrative action. And you have various authorities. Sometimes you have to be creative. Like I said, there's the real route to go in Jordan was through the National Library, and which transfers the case to the criminal prosecution and criminal court. We went through the media commission to have a quick impact. We go through the economic department in Dubai rather than going through the CID and public prosecutor. So you have to be creative and craft the best route possible for your client to be convinced, because at the end of the day, if the client doesn't see value in spending this money and not getting a result, they will not instruct you.
Yeah, I mean, Adi, very good point that Omar makes about the different avenues that you have to attack in different territories. Perhaps you can give us a couple of examples, say, where OSN has been involved in tracking down and prosecuting pirates in different territories.
That's a good question, because it gives me an opportunity to also tell the audience here, a lot of times the evidence is quite dynamic, it keeps changing, and it's cross-border. If you're looking at internet piracy where ISP is involved, there's an IPTV service, etc. And you're looking at highly developed jurisdictions for IP enforcement to jurisdictions where there are laws, but it's not been tested yet. So we've had a few instances where we've tested the law in the UAE, and we were quite successful in that. So there was a particular website which was a torrent-based piracy. I think it was one of our very first big wins, where we were able to convince the court and present the evidence in a simplified manner, which was accepted by the court, and we were able to get deportation followed by a 200,000 dirham fine, a 6-month jail term as well. That kind of set the standards for us. that kind of taught us how to approach the authorities, how to collect the evidence, how to work as a team with the authorities. There is a certain limitation imposed on us by law when it comes to investigating a particular crime in terms of presenting the proof. And that's why we want to make sure we work with external counsel to be able to, within that defined boundary, before we approach the authorities. And then we need to guide the authorities in terms of, filing memos, in terms of explaining things, in terms of asking for expert witnesses. And we've done this across in the UAE several times. We've done this in Jordan. We are looking at things in Egypt next. Case is opening up, so we'll see what we can do there.
Are there any of your territories, Adi, that you just wouldn't bother?
Sorry?
Are there any of your territories where you just wouldn't bother to chase the pirates?
Correct. So that pretty much brings me back to my first statement where I said largely depends on case-to-case basis. So if we see that this is something which is really damaging not just to our business but to the whole ecosystem, then we will collaborate and we will find solutions to tackle that illegality.
The test case usually makes you, there's always the first test case. And probably the first test case for OSN was difficult in UAE, as the first test case with OSN was difficult in Kuwait. So if you take the approach of, I don't want to bother, you'll never move forward. And the learning experience of the judges, the public prosecutors will also never develop. You see, law does not develop on its own. It needs litigant parties to develop it. So the government, the judges, the public prosecutors, they have jurisdiction, qualification, but they cannot develop if you don't bring to them cases that are online streaming. They've never witnessed an online streaming case. So how would you expect them to act on their own if you've never had them experience? So it's part of enriching the legal system is that content providers and copyright owners take action when it affects their business.
Do you think there's a point we can get to where we'll reach an optimum, or will the technology always be chasing us?
To supplement
in terms of that cooperation.
To supplement what Omar was saying, a lot of times a big challenge is to create jurisdiction. So if you're looking at dynamic evidence in the multiple cross-border jurisdictions, and then ultimately there's a supply and the market, so we choose who to target there. And that ties in with your question where we need to be sure of what we're looking at, what do we have in hand, how are we getting affected, what are our rights, do we have any protection under law, is that particular jurisdiction suitable for us? So we need to consider all these aspects. We need to consider this within the business. We need to consider this with our licensors sometimes. There are times we need documentation. It's a process. And a lot of these times, as in the case of free-to-air piracy, which was being discussed this morning, when it comes to internet piracy, a lot of times, these things change multiple hands. So it's not a simplified version, but that doesn't mean we can't get them. We do get them from time to time, and that's where collaboration comes in. So there are certain forums where different rights owners will collaborate and take action. We'll talk about a particular service. We know who they are. We know when to target them. We know what evidence we have.
Let's just talk about punishment for a minute. Occasionally we see very big profile cases in terms of hackers, and they target an 18-year-old guy who tried to get into the Pentagon. They try to extradite him. They put that person as an example. Waleed, do you think, considering that a lot of pirates are young people between the ages of 15 and 25, would you support a prosecution of someone like that to deter other young people from using pirated sources?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Prosecuting such pirates or hackers actually will set an example. Sorry, will set an example for everyone who might think of pirating content or hacking aside. So yes, absolutely, we should chase them. We should chase every single one that's pirating content and hacking sites. Absolutely.
So a lot of pirates are 12-year-old kids.
Yeah.
Do you think we should go after those too?
That's a hard question.
Think of your own 12-year-old kid.
Well, actually,
Omar, I know you have a different opinion on this.
Well, you know, ethical hacking is becoming the most paid profession these days. So,
Is there ethical piracy?
of course. Well, if you need to test your systems, yes, why not? I think the issue is when it comes to 12-year-olds or teenage kids, this is an awareness issue. People are not born criminals, but adults cannot be excused. But when you have teenage children, you should have programs for education, for taking this talent, turning it into something productive and useful for society. You know, a lot of times this is frustration, this is a challenge, this is a way for these kids to overcome or do something successful and see themselves that they've done something successful. This energy can be utilized or converted into something useful. I'm not sure if there are programs or incubators to take these kids to develop them positively. But what I do know is that we've seen this in the software industry, a lot of hacking that were also heavily prosecuted, and then now you have very impressive programs on developing them, on using them, and they're being employed and paid very high salaries. So yeah, there's no reason why the industry should not take a lead on this. You know, this comes from the content providers that can change the direction of these hackers or pirates.
Actually,
Okay.
I have
Waleed?
a perspective here I want to add. Let me share this quick story. A year ago, I was sitting next to my son, watching one of his Disney channels, and he was like, he was 4 years old. He was like, Dad, get me Paw Patrol. I pressed info and told him, we'll need to wait for 12 minutes. He gave me this frowny face, and he was like, why? So frankly, I couldn't explain the linear concept for a 4 years old kid. Especially, he has access to tons of content on his tablet or anywhere. So I believe, and sorry to say that, this kid, when he becomes 12 years old, when he couldn't find his Avenger new movie, he will actually pirate it. So this is adding to what Omar said. I believe broadcasters should start considering their windowing strategy to overcome this, or to avail content to audience that are eager to watch it now.
Adi?
I think I agree with both of them, but the underlying statement here is piracy is not a victimless crime. Whoever's doing it, there is still a victim or victims. Whether it's a business or individuals or creators, they are the victims. That has to be understood well by everyone. And in order to do that, you know, if it's a 12-year-old kid, as Omar and, you know, Waleed have rightly pointed out, you know, it's more of an issue of creating awareness. And for a while back, you know, there was not much being done there. The legal provisions in the states, Australia, etc., in the UK as well, you know, the consumers or the people who have downloaded content were also liable for infringement, and there were strict penalties in place, which was obviously not giving the right amount of, you know, right sort of publicity to the studios or the licensors who were prosecuting them. So over time, this has evolved into a process where everyone is now focused on ensuring that they have some sort of educational program, some sort of educational videos. They have used celebs, they use, you know, whether it's on social media or TV or movies, people talk about it. People are now trying to tell the youngsters who have got so much access to internet now, the way they consume content is through the internet now, that these things are not normal. And this is what you are doing to the society, this is what you're doing to yourself. And there are dangers involved. So
if it's not the kids that we go after, it's obviously the people who are pirating the material in terms of distributing it. I want to ask all three of you, do you think that the current punishments available to the courts in the region are sufficient at the moment? And what would you say would be an adequate punishment, a punishment that would make an example and put people off? There's a lot of money being made by pirates, and at the moment, the potential punishments are too low. Would that be right, Adi?
see, it largely depends on the country or the region you're looking at. So within the Middle East, the legislation in certain countries is yet to be tested, as Omar was saying, And we are a bit skeptical of testing legislation in certain countries because we don't want to create a negative precedent. We don't want the case to be looked in a particular way. So we are a bit careful. But if you look at the legislation in terms of the penalties which are prescribed, etc., I think it's fair. But where we lack is getting damages from the courts. Not necessarily it has to be linked with a civil suit. There should be some sort of compensation when I've presented my case and it's been proved in the court.
But should there be punitive damages? I mean, there's
Yes.
obviously economic damage, but what about punitive damage? Because that's what's actually the way of putting people off, right?
Correct. I mean, the law does prescribe punitive as well as, jail term, etc., as well as pecuniary solutions. But as a business and as, something to create awareness on, this is a crime which not only damages the economy of the country, but is also harming the businesses. It's also harming creativity. So, yes, laws do need to evolve. They need to be tested. They need to be implemented fully. And I should be able to utilize the Copyright Act as well as the Cybercrimes Act completely before the courts. They prescribe penalties, both in terms of economic damages as well as jail term. That's fair. In the EU, in the North America, etc., you get millions and millions of dollars in terms of compensation from the courts. So,
Omar, what's your view on that? In terms of punishment, is it too low?
I think the laws provide for a wide range of penalties. You've seen judgments in UAE up to 200,000 dirhams. You've seen jail term 6 months. You've had deportations in Kuwait, jail term. It happens. You have available. And I think, of course, jail term is much harsher than any high penalty, high fine. But changing the laws hasn't really impacted very much. It's talking to the judges who will eventually decide. They have authority to go below the minimum penalty. They have reasons under the legal system to rule the minimum penalty. So if they did, and the content owner went through a 6 months or 12-month litigation, paid a lot of costs, a lot of effort put together for a slap on the wrist of 5,000 dirhams or $10,000, that doesn't really help the legal system. So, no, I think it's not the law's the issue. The issue is who's deciding on the penalties, and maybe we have to rethink the whole system and think of statutory damages. This is
So the minimums?
Well, the typical issue of minimum fine against minimum jail term doesn't help because eventually the courts always tend to rule the minimum, unless you complement the crime with several crimes like electronic crimes, pornography, copyright. Altogether, then you'll have a very harsh penalty. But if you cannot combine several crimes at once, you're getting low penalty. I think it's fair that what Adi said, there should be a statutory damage that is automatically paid to the content owner. Otherwise, they're always losing. They're losing when they invest in anti-piracy, they're losing when they litigate, they're losing when they see the outcome that the pirates can go and do this again because they're not really worried about the minimum penalty.
Waleed, what do you think in terms of current punishments available? Would you like to see significant amounts of money being put in as fines, significant amounts of jail time?
Yes. We should always consider the business loss of pirating a title or a movie. So the broadcaster, the producer loses tons of money when a title or a movie is pirated. So I'm sure legal guys consider this, the amount of money the broadcaster lost because of the piracy in their cases. And it should be considered, yeah.
Omar, why do you think it is that judges are biased towards the minimums rather than looking, to really impose some serious fines and jail time?
Well, judges are usually biased towards the minimum in any crime, unless they think that this is detriment to society and this is a threat to the economy or national security. So generally, in criminal judges tend to look at lower penalties. However, what they need to look at in terms of piracy is the impact. What's the impact? This 5,000 dirhams fee, has it caused any deterrence? Because at the end of the day, the law gives authority to the judge to issue a penalty provided that it causes deterrence. If it doesn't cause deterrence, this whole case means nothing. So the judges need education to understand that the impact of their ruling or verdict causes or does not cause deterrence, and the impact on the industry as well. How does this work out to them? Are they able to continue and go on and protect their content later on and keep spending money? Or is it useless because it's the same chase that they're doing every time and it's not causing any deterrence? So this is what the judges need to look at. It's beyond how much money this person will be paying as a fine. No, it's beyond that. It's what's the overall impact.
So, Adi, that's obviously clearly a very sensitive thing to be trying to tell judges what they should do. And where do you think the onus for that should be? Do you think the governments, the regulatory authorities within these territories are doing enough to work with the judiciary?
See, I think the underlying question is, again, I'll rather come back to, to this particular question is are the laws keeping up? So the law does cover a lot of these sort of infringements in terms of when protection is given to a licensee or licensor. But as Omar has mentioned, there's a lot of discretionary power with the judges. And the way they look at certain issues is they get 10 criminal cases and there's one IP infringement case. So it's the mindset where they're sitting, presiding over a court where there are 10 criminals and 9 of them have done serious crimes and 1 has been booked in for an IP infringement crime. So his perspective and his outlook is completely different on that matter. The government does try and comply with best practices, and we've seen this around the region. It's evolving. The laws need to catch up with technology. There has to be specific provisions within the law to deal with certain types of piracy. And this is a change we are seeing not just in the Middle East, but we're seeing at, in the EU as well, where there are complicated issues involving Kodi boxes, Android boxes, etc., and where there are particular devices which only search and link to particular pirate stream. And these are the issues which are yet to be addressed in this jurisdiction. And although they run into trouble in the EU, and we've seen recent legislation which is being considered and passed, I think as a solution to your question, the answer is for the government to ask the industry members, what are your issues? Are you comfortable with the law? Are you comfortable with the courts? Is the ease of doing business fair enough for you here? And what is the challenge you face? And then we can present issues and solutions. And that could probably help in guiding the judges in terms of interpretation of the law. There's not a complete need to rewrite the law, perhaps a few amendments, or perhaps an interpretation in a different way.
So we've got the laws and we've got the judgments, but sometimes the devices and the torrent streams continue. How do we enforce the laws that exist and the judgments that are made? Omar, what's your view? Can we?
We've done complicated matters where we need to work with the authorities, and I said, there's a limitation on us to how far we can go to collect evidence. And that's why we have workshops, we engage with the authorities who do these sort of investigations, and with the terrorist activities coming in, money laundering, etc., they're also using similar infrastructure, similar technology. So it's not that the authorities don't know how to investigate this, don't understand it. They do. They just need to be told about it. And I say, if you don't ask, you don't get. So you just need to go out there and ask and test the legislation in certain cases.
Omar, you've worked on surveillances and enforcement operations.
Yeah.
How effective are they?
Well, my best advice would be just always involve the CID with your actions, because general investigation per se is not permitted. This is an activity that is not allowed, even if your content as a copyright owner is being pirated. So it's something that you have to work together with the authorities, particularly the Criminal Investigation Department, see that they're on board with it and approve of it before you anything, because you don't want to end up being accessory to a crime.
Okay. Waleed, I just want to ask you a question. We were talking beforehand about the fact that, we are spending a lot of time looking at trying to defeat the beast of piracy, and that you have a different view, that we can harness piracy. What do you mean by that?
Okay. As a matter of fact, piracy happens on a website that's undefined websites that's sitting in a country that does not criminalize piracy. And these sites are accessible through VPNs, and VPNs are available to everyone. So basically, we have to live with piracy. It will remain. We'll never be able to stop it 100% unless we manage to convince these countries to criminalize piracy.
So should we collaborate with pirates?
Not collaborate, actually make use of it. There is a trend that started in Hollywood that's basically monitoring the traffic on torrent sites. Why monitor? To get insights. Insights helps in what? A lot of things, actually. Number one, for acquisition, content acquisition. For those who don't have sufficient fund to acquire everything, they can basically monitor the traffic to understand the trend, to understand what's hot and what's not, to understand what audience are after, and go acquire this. So they will spend their dollars on trending content, or on the content that audience want. Monitoring this torrent sites also might help us in windowing of a title. How? We all know that the moment a title is ripped, it will not work well on TVOD because it became everywhere. So we need to closely monitor these sites, so the moment we see a ripped title there, we can avail it in in a customized package. Very little window, very small window with very low price point. We actually absorb the trend of ripping this title. Then
Omar, sorry, Omar, what's your view? Is that a dangerous precedent to use piracy as a way of marketing?
Yeah, it can be dangerous, yes, because like I said, if you do engage in anything that's considered not permitted, violation of the law, etc., you have to do it with pre-approved or agreed with the CID, because you don't know how this will backfire if the authorities look at this and start to treat this as a problem. Anything that has to do with testing system, using piracy as a means to study how influential or how good this content is, investigation, all of that is not something I would take lightly. I would definitely have it first pre-approved, not complicated formally, just with the CID, and be sure at least they know I'm doing this under the awareness and the objective is clear. And
absolutely.